Hello and welcome to Below the Hospital, an AAMI podcast on sterile processing and the issues that sterile processing technicians face today. I am your host, Garland Grisby, Interim Assistant Director for Sterile Processing and Endoscope Service Manager at Kaiser Permanente, and I'm a long-standing AAMI member as well. In this podcast, I interview folks from around our industry about sterile processing and ask what some might consider hard questions, but I would say informative questions about our profession. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Horlando Cintron. Horlando is Manager of Perioperative Support Services at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan, New York. In addition to his day-to-day job, Horlando is co-chair of AAMI's Chemical Sterilants Hospital Practice Working Group alongside Alpa Patel of Nelson Labs, whom we also had on the podcast. Horlando has also contributed to AAMI's sterile processing and sterilization guidance documents such as ST79 and ST58. But the subject of today's show is TIR109, External Transport of Processed Medical Device Guidance. Horlando, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Garland. Pleasure to be here with you.
Did I miss anything or did I capture the essence of Horlando?
You absolutely captured, and I was not expecting that much, but thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Hey, there's much to be said about you. So let's just jump right on in here, right? With regard to transportation. Now, how common is transportation of medical devices and packaging before or after sterilization? And what risk does transport create? Now, you can take that in two parts.
So that's a great question. And, I'm going to say that to start, it's very common. Having spent a better part of 30 years in healthcare, sterile processing departments have long been responsible for managing reusable medical devices, right? But the scope has expanded, in my opinion, significantly over the past few decades, right? So when I began in the early 90s, our primary focus was on supporting the core hospital areas, right? Emergency room, L&D, maybe some floor trays, if you will, and the operating room, right? But today, I think, with the rise of ambulatory care settings and offsite reprocessing facilities, our responsibilities and our reach has grown well beyond the hospital walls, right? So transport, I think, creates many risks. It's everywhere. There are often a lack of training, oversight, and awareness. And I think that many facilities don't have the proper guidance on the supplies needed, right? Such as containment devices that are available on the market, or maybe using non-healthcare grade products. So I think there's a huge risk out there. And I think that's why the document was so widely needed, if you will.
Awesome. Right. Yeah, I totally get it. It's not as easy as saying, hey, just take this up the street and deliver it from the clinic to the hospital. Yes, it's dirty. Yes, we used it, but just take it anyway in the backseat of your car.
In your backseat of your car. You hit it right on, right? Because who knows how it's happening, but, the stories are pretty intense.
Right. We should make a movie about it or a documentary. Right. So for those who don't spend their time in the weeds with industry standards like we do, could you explain what the difference is between an AAMI standard and a TIR?
Sure. So I think, standards, they contain requirements that are considered normative, right? Standards serve to assist healthcare industries with performance guidances for the use of products, accepted criteria, and even the advancement in technology, right? I believe there's sort of two types of standards. We have medical device standards, which are intended to outline performance. And then you got the user-based standards, which are intended to promote the safe use guidance and applications in healthcare systems. So those are your standards, but your TIRs are really your technical information reports, right? They contain the guidelines instead of requirements. It could be used to support a standard, if you will, or a pre-standard, if you will, to adjust a particular aspect in the field that we're seeing some concerns with. When there's not sufficient time to develop a standard, I think TIRs are commonly used to bring that information quicker to the end user and just to start bringing guidance earlier, faster, because standards generally take a lot more time, if you will.
Nice, nice. I generally tell folks when they ask me that, I said it's like a manufacturer's instructions for use. That's the standard. That would be the standard if I'm using an illustration, right? Manufacturer's instructions
Sure.
are the standard, but a customer letter would be a TIR,
Oh, I like that.
which is something like, okay, you need this document fast. There's an update. They don't have time to update the whole manufacturer's instructions because it's 500 pages, but here's a customer letter giving you, new guidance.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. That's right to the point, right? That customer letter that's coming from your standards, if you will.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So, well, let's talk about you mentioned it briefly in the outset about the document scope. So what does it cover, and does it apply to the entire facility to facility prep, transportation, and receipt processes, or what is the scope?
So I think this document applies to all healthcare facilities, right? It applies to ambulatory care centers and your off-site reprocessing centers, right? Which, oftentimes is not getting, viewed as quickly as or as they should. I think this document was created by regulatory experts to help guide the development. It includes important topics like environmental factors, maybe loading and unloading procedures for your cargo areas, your vehicles, if you will. It has some design consideration for both inside and outside facility. But I think it also covers, as you said, the labeling, the tracking, the security risk related to chain of custody, if you will, right? We definitely need that guidance where facilities understand what they need to track from a regulatory perspective. I think other key areas, transport carriers that are used for it, PPE, if you will. I think that's, important. Cargo space, cleaning of your cargo spaces and verification, right?
Right.
You just can't place many of these, these devices on carpet, if you will, right? So I think that's something that's important. And I think this TIR is packed with a lot of useful information, if you will, especially helpful for those who are new to the field or with little regulatory awareness, such as you and I, right? I think,
right.
There's a small percentage of us out there in the field that are actually taking the time to help develop, and we could really use more frontline users, I think, to help bring that awareness out further, if you will.
Nice. So would you say, or are there any specific pitfalls or problems that this TIR is meant to address other than what you just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, innovation has opened many doors to improve patient outcomes, right? In my opinion, I think that began many moons ago when laparoscopic instruments first came out, right? You laugh, but you remember laparoscopics when they first came out. It was like, wow, these long instruments, right? Then we got robotics, right?
Right.
And robotic instruments really help patients recover quicker, if you will, and get people back to normal lives. But they're longer, they're more complex, they're harder to clean, right? I think our departments, when they were first made in, the early 70s or even 60s, if you will, we had small sinks, we had small space, right? and then came these long, robust instruments that require multiple part cleaning and training. So I think, this TIR was really needed just to help people understand the complexities that we're facing in healthcare. I think the pitfall that it really addressed is there was a major gap in planning. CPD wasn't often a part of the planning process. And so now with the outsets of reprocessing centers that have grown and are being used quite frequently, I think that this document is made to address those demands that are changing in where processing is happening and allows for useful guidance for facilities to be able to better understand what are those risks that they may be facing in those offsite process and getting instruments from part where they are to where they need to go, if you will.
Nice, nice. So you mentioned a little while ago about the small percentage of us that are part of these documents. Now, how important was your own and your fellow committee members in hospital experience to the production of this document?
Good question. So I think this document is truly invaluable. I'd say that guidance that comes solely from manufacturers without the input of frontline experience can be quite risky, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. In my experience, such documents often miss real world challenges faced in our day-to-day operations. They may unintentionally create more confusion or problems than they solve. So that's why having experts who actually work in the field contribute to this kind of guidance is so important. I think it ensures recommendations and for practical, safe, and truly supportive environments for both employees and patient outcomes, right? So I think having that frontline users such as you and I help guide in the TIRs, if you will, brings that better, safe patient outcome and reduces infection control risk.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up because, we've all seen documents and like, yeah, this looks good on paper, right? But it's unrealistic and it's undoable. And so it is important for us to be part of these decisions that are made. So TIR 109 provides a pretty extensive, clearly a pretty extensive guidance, not just on handling devices in SPD, but how they should be stored in transit. Now, is the document relevant to other hospital departments or even professionals outside of the hospital? You did mention ambulatory briefly.
So yeah, I can see how this document would be valuable for maybe your small office-based procedure areas where there's often little or no oversight, such as your dental or maybe ophthalmology practices. I think these settings, they don't have dedicated sterile processing professionals that really understand the road. I think this guidance can help them as well fill the gap by providing the directions and the proper processes for reducing the risk and improving safe patient outcomes. I mean, I think the media has highlighted many small facility where practices have gone awry. And I think that this document here is one of those technical information reports that would help address that for those small office-based practices.
I'm sure they will definitely appreciate it. We always hear they don't know that they don't know, or we don't know what we don't know. And it's true. Yeah. It's true, especially for those offsites, those satellites, those small outliers, if you will. So now you mentioned, I heard you earlier, you said a pre-standard. So now it's a question, right? Because folks wonder about TIRs, but the question for you is there a standard in the works?
Well, I think that this TIR only begins to scratch the surface, if you will. In my opinion, there's many challenges in the industry. And based on what I've seen with other TIRs, I think more and more healthcare facilities will start facing citations from regulatory bodies. And as these issues become more visible and as the number of reports and deficiencies grow and the demand for clearer standards and guidance, I think will increase. I say at that point, AAMI will likely get that call. And you'll see a formal standard be pushed in the works. So if history has anything to say, I would say the answer is going to be yes. Yeah. There will be a need for a standard. And like I said, I think we've only scratched the surface of some of the challenges that are out there, and a standard which can provide more in-depth and that regulatory requirement, if you will, it is definitely in the works.
Yes. Sometimes we need those requirements, right? Sometimes because, trying to push something that's needed, some folks will say, hey, this is just an information report. It's just informational. It's not required. So yeah, looking forward to it. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say, we broached it earlier. The TIRs, they're informational, but they're quicker to get out there. So I would say now that this TIR is out there, I'd say we definitely need to start getting the ball in the works to creating the standard for this, because offsite processing centers are growing quickly.
Well, you know what? Maybe after this podcast, you and Alpa will get some calls and the work gets started right away.
Well, you may be getting that call as well, my friend.
Right. It's a never-ending story.
Yes.
Well, Horlando, thank you for taking the time out to sit and chat with us on this episode of Below the Hospital. We're looking forward to seeing you later down the line and maybe talking about the standard when it gets to the point of fruition.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure and great seeing you again, my friend.
So, as usual, folks, I hope this episode has been useful. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. If you want to support the podcast, you can find us at Below the Hospital on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and AAMI. Until then, see you when I see you.